alarm clock rings. It's 6 a.m. And then right there in bed I shave. That's what I said. While I am still in bed I shave. And the lather drips and the bed gets wet. And oh, what a lousy shave I get. But think of the time I save.
Think of the time he saves.
This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. As any connoisseur of the Pajama Game knows, the heart and soul of that show is the obsessive time study man Hines, created by Eddie Foy Jr., a comic master. Now, 50 years later, a comic master of the 21st century has taken on the role and made it his own. Here to introduce him, Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
I agree completely with Susan. There's a lot of talk these days about Harry Connick Jr. and his chest in the Pajama Game, but the heart and soul of this musical is Vernon Hines, and he is being played very skillfully, very subtly, and with great, great humor by one of the really terrific comic actors of our day, Michael McKean.
Thank you.
Whom you know from such movies as A Mighty Wind and Best in Show, and who wrote the wonderful music for Waiting for Guffman.
That's correct. Not all of it.
Not all of it,
I had
but the
some
best
help
songs,
with
right?
from my little friends.
Yeah,
Christopher and Harry. Actually, Chris and Harry wrote some of the tunes, and I wrote some others.
What was the big tune that you wrote Waiting for Guffman?
A Penny for Your Thoughts.
Well.
Yeah, that is the title. Yeah.
And in A Mighty Wind, you wrote A Kiss at the End of the Rainbow.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of things on that. I wrote that with my wife.
Oscar nominated.
The actress Annette O'Toole.
Indeed,
as Vincent Price would have said if he had been married to Annette O'Toole, indeed.
We're going to jump into the Pajama Game for a minute, but just on the subject of these two songs, these songs are parodies, I know, but they've sort of taken on a life of their own beyond parodies. I mean, A Kiss at the End of the Rainbow could really work in any sort of, sappy movie today, right?
Well, I like to think of A Kiss at the End of the Rainbow as a song that will someday be played too much at weddings.
Yeah.
Like We've Only Just Begun. Eventually, no, it was a lovely song 10 years ago, but please don't play that one.
Now, in the Pajama Game, you have one of the great scores of all time.
Yes, indeed.
Richard Adler and Jerry Ross.
Mm-hmm.
As a composer yourself, what is it about, do you always love this score? And now that you're singing every night, what is in this score that you think has kept it fresh all these years?
Well, my parents were the kind of parents who had a lot of show albums. And my dad actually worked in the record business, so he got a lot of scoop albums that didn't even open, shows that didn't get to Broadway. But we still have, back at my mom's house in Seacliff, we have all these cast albums and stuff from shows that you never heard. But the big hits were, the big hits. I loved Guys and Dolls, and I loved Pajama Game. Guys and Dolls I didn't get as much. I just loved the funny stuff, and it was so crisp and everything. And Pajama Game, I got everything. I got pretty much every joke, and especially Hines, who has the comic numbers in the original score. There's an additional song that Richard Adler wrote many years afterwards, which I also
Me, Myself, and I? Lovely
Yeah, it's
song.
called The Three of Us.
The Three of Us, yeah.
Fabulous song. It was written for Jimmy Durante in 1964, and Richard just ran into him one day and he said, I got a song for you. We're still doing that, of course, Richard is, bless his heart. And,
he wants to put more songs in the show,
yeah. And so Jimmy did it live, and he did it on TV, but he never recorded it. So it's this kind of a brand new, very old song. It's lovely. So, yeah, I think what's great about these is they're insidious. 7.5 cents. The melody is teased all the way through in the overture and the entr'acte and in some incidental music, but you don't know what the payoff is until the number appears very late in the show, and by that time you're already walking out singing.
Right.
Yeah. So I just think it's very hooky, as we say in the pop business.
Yeah.
But it's just great songwriting.
Now, it's always been a sort of a mystery in the theater, and I wondered, since you've been working with Dick Adler, who did what in this Adler-Ross combination? Lyrics, music. It's still an unsolved mystery in the theater world.
I think we only think of it as a mystery because we know so clearly how Rodgers and Hammerstein did it. They were always very open.
There's one who does the music, one who does the lyrics.
Yes, but Rodgers would take the title first. Hammerstein would be writing, and he said, well, here's this line here. Maybe this is a song title. Maybe we should start working on that. And he would, without having written the song, would give the title to Rodgers. Rodgers would create a melody that would allow for that phrase.
Right.
And then it would go back to Hammerstein, and then he would finish the lyric.
And it was said that Rogers could write that music in about 15
Yes,
minutes,
right,
and
very
Hammerstein
fast.
would take
Would
3
agonize.
weeks
Yeah, yeah.
agonizing
Well,
over
because he had
lines.
been at it a long time, and he knew about failure as much as anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, when he was writing some of these shows, you look in, you go to the IBDB, which is the greatest place in the world. And you go there and you look up Hammerstein II, and it's boggling how many shows he did, and some of them ran for 13 performances.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, all those. What was that theater? There's a little theater where P.G. Woodhouse used to.
Yeah, the something Gaiety or the.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
George White, George White
Scandals.
Scandals, they're just
those-
all that stuff. I mean, and it's phenomenal. So if you know enough about failure, if you know what doesn't work, then of course you're going to be a little fastidious about finding what does.
Right.
And of course that's how they wrote those great musicals.
So you have no sense of who did what with the Adler Ross?
No, and I also know from I've written a lot of songs with my wife now, and we don't have any one way.
You don't? Sorry.
No. Sometimes she writes an entire lyric and says, "Here, I don't know how this sounds," and I'll put the melody to it. More often than not, she comes up with a melody and a lyrical content, and then we finish it together. There are songs that I've had sitting in the trunk for 30 years that she is now helping me finish.
Did you write
So there's all kinds of noise.
An aside, did you write together before you fell in love with Annette?
No. I think we were kind of snowballing towards songwriting as we fell in love, in my opinion.
Did you start out wanting to be a songwriter, or did you want to be an actor? I mean,
Well, I always wanted to be an actor. As I saw Stanley Holloway's one-man show. It was the first Broadway show I ever saw. And that was the night I said, well, this looks like a really good job. I mean, look at all the seats are pointing toward him, and he's pointing toward them, and everyone's having a great time.
so you want to be an actor, but you've always been writing songs?
Yeah, well, in the early 60s, the folk thing was happening, and
Right.
Bob Dylan was happening, and everybody I knew, we were all like 15, 16 years old, we all wanted to be, Bob Dylan. And
Protest.
Well, protest and just write great songs, songs that were like, just wouldn't, knock the ear out. And so that's kind of how I picked up guitar and started songwriting. Later in 1970, I went to Los Angeles and became part of this group called the Credibility Gap, which was Harry Shearer, David Lander, me, a guy named Richard Beebe. And we it was a radio show. And it was a news show, but we would do a straight news broadcast, and then we would do sketches and songs on that. So then I started kind of writing more in earnest, kind of to order.
Kind of like This Is the Week That Was?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But radio.
Right.
And I've just always done both.
Now, you guys seem to be sort of the perfect team that a producer would turn to now to write a Broadway musical, a musical comedy. I mean, have people offered it to you? Have you tried? Are you interested?
Yes and no.
Tell us the yes and then the no.
No, people are very interested. Annette and I have been writing a musical for the last year or so. And when we are in the same city for more than 3 weeks, we're going to actually finish. It's been kind of challenging, but yeah, we're working on a show right now.
About? Can you tell us what's about?
It takes place during the 20th century. That's as much as I'll narrow.
You don't want to talk it away.
Narrow it down too much. Yeah.
Is it your
no,
first?
I just don't want to be scooped.
Your first stab at a musical?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd have to say yes.
It is interesting, and just sort of looking at the movies that you've done with Christopher Guest, Mighty Wind, and Best in Show. I always get the sense that these movies are acted by and put together by people who started somewhere at some point in the theater. Is that true? Are most of you from the theater?
I would have to say so. Christopher, yes. Eugene, definitely.
Yeah, I mean all the Canadian guys.
Yeah, Fred Willard was a stage actor. He was with Second City, but then
Yeah.
he and Chris did, back to Alan Arkin again, did Little Murders together that Alan directed. Catherine.
I guess I get that sense because the characters that you create in those movies are really larger than life and could actually be on a
Right.
stage. It's not sort of small movie making. It's
I think what happens is, and it's very interesting, the characters are, are
They're
big
grotesques
They're
in
big
some
and
ways.
juicy. Yes, exactly. Grotesque is another good word. But because of the nature of the improvisation, they are kept within kind of a reasonable conversational
Yes.
depth and breadth. And I think it's kind of, there's a nice self-correction that happens there. A great example is Michael Higgins' character in Best in Show. He's my significant other in this movie. And he's amazing. And you had a feeling that if we, there were no cameras and we were pulling back to row G, we'd see something much broader.
Yeah.
But everyone, it's an amazing character because it's only as big as life, and that life gets pretty big.
Yes.
But it's also very real and just screamingly funny.
Well, I found that the performance in the Pajama Game, the Vernon Hines character, could in less skillful hands be played a little bit over the top. His little obsession with time, all that could be a little broad. And I really admired the rather subtle way you played. I mean, you make him human, and you really feel for this guy who's in love with this woman, and he's worried that she's drifting away.
Yeah. Well, that's something we all identify with. You don't want to lose the one you love. I mean, there's a song lyric right there.
It's going to be in your musical. That's right. We got to wrap it up here. Michael McKean in the Pajama Game as Vernon Hines, the timekeeper. Terrific performance, and we very much look forward to your musical. And
don't hold your breath, department. We got a lot of work to do, but we love it.
And you're in the Pajama Game at least until the end of the run?
Till June, yes.
Till June, and if it moves to Broadway, would you go with it?
It depends on a couple of things. Jury duty. I live back in Los Angeles. The dog is not going to know me. So I gotta make some contingency plans.
Well, if you don't, then if you miss him now, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Michael McKean at the Pajama Game at the Roundabout. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you very much.
Tick-tock, tick-tock, 10 minutes music. Tick-tock, tick-tock, time goes by.
Oh, I love to sit and watch those seconds multiply.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Cross the desert and fair, man. Breathe that mountain air, man. Well, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
As a reporter covering the theater, it's always nice to be able to call a producer up and get a candid opinion about what's going on in this business. Very few people are willing to speak openly about it often, but one of them is with us tonight. His name is James Freydberg. He is the producer currently represented on Broadway with Ring of Fire. He did The Wonderful Hedwig and the Angry Inch a few years ago off Broadway. Full Moon and Big. I know he doesn't like me to bring that up, but that's how I got to know you, in fact, covering the escapades of Big. Welcome to Theater Talk, Jim. Jim also teaches producing at Columbia University, and so he's going to sort of take us under his wing today and teach us all about Broadway producing. The first question, what exactly is a Broadway producer in this day and age?
Well, it's interesting. There's probably several categories. And in the era that we're in now, if you take a look at some of the programs, you'll see there's 20-some-odd producers listed on it. Others, like Ring of Fire, just have 5. And what is it? Who is the real producer? And one of the things I taught in the classes, I once brought in a whole bunch of programs and said, all right, now tell me who the producer of the show is.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting.
All right, why do we have 20 producers on a show now?
Because the cost of producing is so high. And so many people join the production at a very large amount of money, a certain large percentage of the overall capitalization, and in turn for that, they get producer billing.
So it's an investor's title.
I mean, once upon a time,
that's an investor producer. There's several different types.
Yeah.
There's creative producers. There's producers who are also general managers. There's several different categories.
It kind of trivializes the title of producer, doesn't it?
I don't know if it trivializes it, but it does make it happen. Which is not trivial.
All right, but wait a minute, though. This is my read on the situation. You're a producer in the old-fashioned sense of somebody who, went out and raised money from investors. Angels, they used to call them.
That's
but
right.
now those angels are producers. And instead of being able to make a unilateral decision as the producer, you have to have those investor now producers all around the conference table with you. And every decision is now a big group decision with everyone. Is that how the business has changed?
Well, I don't think that is the case. I think in some cases that's true. When there really isn't a lead producer who has producing experience, that chaotic situation can occur. But most of these people know that there is somebody within that group who really is the leader of the pack and is in charge of what's happening and works with them. When you have different people on your roster as producers with you, they come from another business often, and they have other experiences that can be advantageous to you, whether it be that they're from a marketing field or whether they're from any type of industry. All those industries can bring something to the table that's important, because 85% of producing after the show has started to be seen by an audience is really marketing. And everybody who has been successful in another business has had to have marketing experience in some
Well, but
way.
you have people
So
who are
that can be
producers who
helpful.
are married to people successful in business. What are they bringing to the table?
They can bring,
Yeah, I
they
mean,
can,
they're
not
bringing
just
money.
money though. They can bring experience of being married to somebody that person can come in and have thoughts. You know, that big table that you hear about, the table of chaos.
That's why I hear a lot about the table of chaos from my end of things.
Yes, it does happen in some shows and it doesn't in others. It depends on who is the lead producer and the ability that they bring with them that gives them the respect of those people to understand that that person probably knows more about this industry than they know about this industry, and they know more about their industry than the producer knows about theirs. And so he, as a really attuned person, knows what to take from them as advice and not to. When he is able to do that, chaos doesn't happen. You know, we have a limit on the time of our ad meetings. I've heard of ad meetings that have gone on for 5 hours.
I often hear about those.
We have an hour-and-a-half limit before the show opens, and afterwards we have a 1 hour limit.
But then can you say, and the poster will be blue?
No,
You,
it
Jim
doesn't
Freydberg.
work that way.
Doesn't work that way.
Our ad agency, which is Spotco in this
Yes.
case, it was a sensational ad
Yes.
agency, they have the freedom to be artists. That's one of the key things about producing, is to know who's an artist, and I believe everybody's an artist. The guys who handle the props, they are artists. They have the right to make the decisions that they need to get the props where they should be and to make the show running well. Well, the same thing should happen with the ad agency as well. None of the people around the table are experts at what has to be done with color and coordinating things as the ad agency. So the key thing is for them to be prepared before that group walks in. If they let that group take control, then they are really not the ad agency you
reap
should
the whirlwind.
be with.
So good producing is being able to sort of pull back and let the various artistic components of your show do it as they do best, and then you move in it sometimes and say, that's great, but I think we should adjust it a little bit this way.
Yes, you know, in a case of, for instance, when we went into the ad meeting on Ring of Fire, they showed us a full-page ad, not because they thought we should be doing a full-page ad. Actually, they didn't. But we had already discussed that it probably should be radio, because a large percentage of the audience for a show like Ring of Fire isn't necessarily in Manhattan.
That's right.
It's outside of Manhattan. So what is a
The Johnny Cash music.
The Johnny Cash music. So what would a full-page ad do for us? Really not very much, because we need people to hear from it another way. And so they showed what it could be, but then they explained brilliantly why it shouldn't be that. You know, it's interesting. You know, I teach this to my class, that one of the problems is we call our industry show business, but it's never been run like a business. Because what ends up happening is they sit down, they see the reviews, which I don't even read, by the way, which is interesting. I never read reviews of shows I do. And they sit down and say, oh, the reviews aren't good, or the reviews are bad, or whatever they are, and therefore we should close the show. You would never serve a meal to a bunch of critics if you had started a restaurant and they didn't like your meal and close the restaurant. None of the people that are around that table would ever have not been successful in their own businesses before they became producing.
If they folded their tents.
If they folded their tent in one day. And that's one of the things I talked to them about at the time. You're in this business, you're in this business. Would you have ever done something like that?
Now, explain,
this is a business.
Yeah, explain specifically to us, because Ring of Fire did not get the greatest notices in the world.
Well,
You didn't read Ben Brantley's Pan in the Time?
I know about it.
You know about it,
but
right.
not in detail.
Right.
I know that it was not as good as I would have hoped for.
Right.
But
But
I
don't you need to know what you're
it is.
working with, or do you say, are you saying though then that the critics don't have as much power as they once did, because you've all figured out ways of doing shows that are reaching people like Ring of Fire who don't necessarily live and die by what the New York Times says?
Well, we've seen that in Wicked.
Yeah.
We've seen that in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. We've seen that in a lot of shows. Suddenly, this is, you know, in London, this process that's happening now was very normal. There was never one critic who could knock you off, and that was the end of it. But in New York, there was. And also there was, because we let that happen. If Frank Rich didn't like something, we were ready to put up the closing notice.
Right. So, because nowadays you get the sense, the reviews come out, and if they're not great, you get the sense that, well, we're going to market around them. We're going to fight around them, because we know there's an audience for this show. We just have to get there. And that's a part of producing now.
Well, if you recall, when you came up to Buffalo and you saw Ring of Fire,
Yeah.
and you saw a really big, enthusiastic audience.
And it got great reviews in Buffalo,
It did. And it got great reviews here as well. There are many, many, many great reviews here. From what I've been told, when I see the list, this is a great one, this is mixed. That's all I see. And sometimes if the ad agency says, well, I think we could use a quote from this review, and I'll say, no, never use a quote from a review that isn't that you have on the bad list.
You're a rare producer. And But I have to say, the audience at Ring of Fire when I was there was going berserk with joy.
That has been
piece of
consistently the
theater.
response from Buffalo. In the beginning in New
here
York,
too, yeah.
it wasn't so much, and then all of a sudden it began to click in
Yeah.
when it began to find its audience. And you were at opening night.
Yeah.
And that was like an audience I've never seen before.
Well, there are a lot of them were in from Nashville.
I don't know, were there? I don't know.
It was a fascinating experience to be at the opening of a show like Ring of Fire, because there is this split, and I think Ring of Fire is an example of a split that is occurring more and more. There is the theater people, we die-hard theater people. We love our Rodgers and Hart and our Rodgers and Hammerstein. And then, you're bringing in Johnny Cash music and Beach Boys music and all these other new kinds, different types of music that haven't been on Broadway before. And at Ring of Fire, you saw the Nashville people who were there, loving it. And then you saw the sort of old-fashioned Broadway producers occasionally attempting to keep time with the music, which is funny in itself. And then one guy comes out and he's singing, look at them beans. And there's this mystified look by the Broadway poobahs, beans? And I explained why. I said, he means haricot vert. And then, then they got it. But what I'm trying to say is there is a split with the material that's being offered on Broadway now and the sort of traditional theater-going audience, the little theater club.
Well, I think what happened, you remember when Frank Rich was a reviewer at the Times, and what happened was there was this habit of, if he reviewed something that was in London or out of town or in a regional theater, and it was a rave review, immediately so-called producers would grab it and bring it into New York and say they produced it. But technically, they were really presenters. Right. And then when he left that area and went into another,
they had no leader.
Not only that, they didn't know what to do. So the only muscle that they had ever really, really used was the muscle of invest in what you know. And so right away they went to revivals, never realizing that revivals are played in every dinner theater. They don't really have a chance. Very few have really had a chance to have a long run. We lost the producer who was daring enough to try to do new things, and we found the money was gravitating to either stars or catalog situations. Right. And when you take a look at a musical that happened this year, Jersey Boys, which is not a jukebox musical at all. It's a book musical, and a really good book musical, and it makes sense that the music is in that show. Right. But some of the others haven't made sense because they've kind of glued on some funny, phony story to make the music have a reason for being, and that's why we had a lot of problems.
Well, Ring of Fire's not a jukebox musical either. Ring of Fire is done by Richard Maltby. It reminds me more of Ain't Misbehavin', an impressionistic look at the man who created this music.
I think it's a hybrid. I think you're right. I think it's very different. I think what Richard Maltby has done is to create a story within what Johnny Cash wrote. Or, he didn't write all those songs also, with the songs that he loved to present. But this is not a concert, so it's interesting. I don't know what this is, except that I know the audience that I see continually, even after the opening, has been amazing.
But let me ask you, there's always been this sort of, country western music is not going to work, or country, I've been corrected by my country western friends that it's called country music, not country and western, that country music is not going to work on Broadway. The jury's still out on that, isn't it? Why do you think there's this prejudice against country music in the theater on Broadway?
I think that in some ways, New Yorkers are almost afraid sometimes to say that they're willing to go to the level that country music does, which is sort of the red state feel. But this is really a red state, blue state musical, because it's really about all of us.
So they got to get past thinking, this is what people in Texas listen to.
They have to get past that. And we know that in New York City, country music has never been a big seller. But we know outside of New York City, in New York State, it's one of the largest sellers. So we know that there are people who do understand it. There are 2,300 radio stations
in the nation that are devoted to country music.
That's right. But there's none in New York City.
And the producer's job is to get those people listening to that radio station into Ring of Fire, and Ring of Fire will run a long time.
that is the object. But more than that, it would be nice if some of the people who believe they're so sophisticated they don't really need to hear that would come in, and what they would really find out is that they would open up their hearts. They would cry, and I can see it beginning to happen, and they would really realize that there's something more. Because one of the great things about theater is to walk in the door and find out something's happening that you never knew.
Yeah.
And that's why revivals aren't the answer. The real answer to producing is to be able to step up and say, I want to do something new and different. And when you do that, that's when you get a box office like Wicked has had, which is absolutely sensational. And what's new and different about it, forget that it came from a book, it is something very exciting that's happening for an audience there. They're discovering something. And when you get an audience and you can move them that way, the box office rings big.
Well,
That's
we'll check in
exciting.
with you. We'll check in with you in a few months, Jim, to see.
You can check in with me daily.
See how the producer's doing. Jim Freydberg, producer of Ring of Fire and professor of producing at Columbia University.
Graduate classes.
Graduate class. Thanks for being our guest on Theater Talk.
Okay, thanks.
What